The champagne glass slipped from Karen's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble as she stared at the invoice in disbelief. $847,000. For a pool she demanded be torn down and rebuilt because it was 3 inches too shallow. But Marcus wasn't just any contractor. He was her ex-husband's business partner, and he'd been waiting 23 years for this moment. As Karen's face drained of color, Marcus smiled coldly and delivered the words that would destroy her perfectly curated life. Payment is due in full. Today. The Mercedes-AMG purred to a stop in the circular driveway of the Blackwood estate, its chrome gleaming against the backdrop of manicured hedges that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Karen Blackwood stepped out, her Louboutin heels clicking against imported Italian stone with the precision of a metronome. At 48, she was still stunning in that calculated way that money could buy: strategic Botox, personal trainers, and a wardrobe that whispered rather than shouted its astronomical price tags. She surveyed her domain with the satisfaction of a conquering general. The estate sprawled across 12 acres of prime California real estate, every square foot designed to intimidate and impress. But today, her ice-blue eyes fixed on the construction zone that had once been her backyard. Paradise. Unacceptable, she murmured, her voice carrying that particular tone that had made household staff quit without notice and contractors abandon projects mid-job. Marcus Rivera wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his work glove, leaving a streak of dust across his weathered skin. At 52, he looked every bit the construction foreman he'd been for the past 3 decades: broad shoulders, calloused hands, and the kind of steady presence that came from building things that lasted. He watched Karen approach with the wariness of a man who'd learned to read storms before they hit. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice neutral but his dark eyes alert. "We are making good progress on the excavation." Karen's gaze swept over the chaos of dirt, machinery, and workers. What had once been a stunning infinity pool, perfectly serviceable, award-winning even, was now a gaping wound in her backyard. She demanded its destruction 2 weeks ago after hosting a dinner party where someone had mentioned that regulation competition pools were supposed to be exactly 8 feet deep, not 7 feet 9 inches. Progress. Karen's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Marcus, I can see progress. What I can't see is perfection. And perfection is what I'm paying for." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos with the focus of a detective examining evidence. "Look at this angle. The northeast corner is clearly off by several degrees. And don't get me started on the tile work around what used to be the spa area. The grouting is completely uneven." Marcus glanced at his crew, who had paused their work to watch the exchange. He recognized the look in their eyes, the same expression he'd seen on countless job sites when dealing with clients who moved goalposts like chess pieces. "Mrs. Blackwood, the specifications you approved called for." "I don't care what I approved 2 weeks ago," Karen interrupted, her voice rising enough to carry across the construction site. "I care about what I'm looking at right now." "And what I'm looking at is substandard work that wouldn't pass inspection at a community center, let alone at my home." The words hit their mark. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "The work meets all building codes and exceeds industry standards. The pool you're referring to was perfectly functional and beautifully designed." Was being the operative phrase, Karen snapped. "Because now it's gone, and I need you to understand something very clearly, Marcus. I don't settle for good enough. I don't accept industry standard. I demand excellence, and if you can't deliver that, I'll find someone who can." She turned on her heel, surveying the destruction with theatrical disappointment. "Tear it all out. Start over. And this time, I want it done right." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the construction equipment seemed to hold its breath. Marcus felt 20 pairs of eyes on him, his crew, subcontractors, everyone waiting to see how he'd respond to a client demanding they redo weeks of work because of imaginary imperfections. "Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus said carefully, "we are talking about starting from scratch. Again, that's going to involve significant additional costs." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Money isn't the issue. Quality is the issue. Time is the issue. My daughter's engagement party is in 6 weeks, and I will not have her celebrating next to some half-finished construction project." She pulled out her checkbook with the flourish of someone accustomed to solving problems with money. "How much?" Marcus looked at the crater that had been a pool, then at the materials already ordered, the labor already invested, the schedules already disrupted. A lesser contractor might have simply quoted a number and moved on. But Marcus Rivera hadn't built his reputation by backing down from unreasonable clients. "It's not that simple," he said. "We've already poured the foundation. The plumbing is in place. The electrical work is roughed in. You're talking about undoing 3 weeks of work that was completed to your exact specifications." "My specifications," Karen repeated, her voice dropping to that dangerous register that preceded explosions. "My specifications were for a pool. That would be the envy of Beverly Hills. What you've given me is a liability that will decrease my property value." She stepped closer, invading his personal space with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Let me be very clear about something, Marcus. I've checked your references. I know your reputation. You're supposed to be the best pool contractor in Southern California. So either prove it, or I'll make sure everyone in my social circle knows that Marcus Rivera's company delivers mediocre work at premium prices." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt his hands clench involuntarily, then forced them to relax. He'd dealt with difficult clients before, but Karen Blackwood was in a category all her own, the kind of person who wielded money and social influence like weapons. "I'll need time to calculate the costs," he said finally. "You have until tomorrow," Karen replied. "And Marcus, when you give me that number, remember that I value my time at roughly $5,000 an hour. Every day this project runs over schedule costs me money, reputation, and patience, and I have very little of the latter left." She started toward the house, then paused at the edge of the construction zone. "Oh, and one more thing. I want you to personally oversee every aspect of this project. Not your foreman, not your crew chief. You. Because when this is finished, I want to be absolutely certain that there's only one person to blame if it's not perfect." Marcus watched her disappear into the house, her heels clicking against marble like the countdown of a ticking bomb. Around him, his crew slowly returned to work, but he could feel their glances, their questions, their growing concerns about a project that seemed to expand like wildfire every time they thought they had it contained. He pulled out his phone and called his office. "Linda, it's Marcus. I need you to run numbers on the Blackwood project. Complete tear-out and restart." Again. Linda's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd been fielding increasingly frantic calls from subcontractors and suppliers. Again, Marcus confirmed. "And Linda, make sure we account for everything. Every hour, every material cost, every permit fee. I have a feeling Mrs. Blackwood is about to learn the difference between demanding perfection and paying for it." As he ended the call, Marcus looked at the destruction surrounding him and felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd been in construction long enough to recognize certain types of clients, the ones who saw contractors as servants rather than professionals, who believed that money gave them license to treat people however they pleased. But Karen Blackwood had made one critical miscalculation. She'd assumed that Marcus Rivera was just another contractor who would bend to her will rather than risk losing a high-profile client. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting long shadows across the torn-up backyard. Marcus stood alone among the debris, calculating not just the financial cost of Karen's demands, but the human cost, the overtime his crew would have to work, the other projects that would be delayed, the reputation that could be destroyed by one vindictive socialite with too much money and too little conscience. But as he looked at the chaos surrounding him, Marcus Rivera began to smile. Because sometimes, the most demanding clients provided the most satisfying opportunities for justice, and Karen Blackwood was about to receive a very expensive education in the consequences of treating people like disposable commodities. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the Blackwood estate as Marcus pulled his truck through the gates at precisely 8 a.m. He'd spent the night running calculations, making phone calls, and consulting with his attorney. The manila envelope on his passenger seat contained more than just numbers. It contained 23 years of suppressed rage finally given mathematical form. Karen was already waiting on her terrace, dressed in cream-colored linen that probably cost more than his truck payment. She held a delicate china cup that steamed with what Marcus assumed was some exotic tea blend. Everything about her posture suggested a woman confident in her ability to bend the world to her will. "Punctual," she called down to him. "I appreciate that in contractors." Marcus walked across the torn landscape of her backyard, his work boots crunching on scattered gravel. The destruction looked even worse in daylight. 3 weeks of careful work reduced to an expensive crater. His crew wouldn't arrive for another hour, giving him time for what he suspected would be the most important conversation of his professional life. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, looking up at her perch above the chaos. "I have your numbers." "Excellent." Karen descended the stone steps with the grace of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. "I assume you've factored in the accelerated timeline? My daughter's engagement party cannot be postponed." Marcus opened the envelope and withdrew a single sheet of paper. The number at the bottom had been triple-checked, verified by his accountant, and reviewed by his attorney. It was precise, justifiable, and absolutely devastating. $847,324, he said, his voice steady as granite. Plus tax. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Karen's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips, her perfectly composed expression flickering for just an instant. "I'm sorry, what?" $847,324, Marcus repeated, extending the itemized invoice toward her. "That's the cost of tearing out the existing work and rebuilding according to your new specifications." Karen set down her cup with careful precision, but Marcus caught the slight tremor in her fingers. She took the invoice and began reading, her eyes moving across the columns of numbers with increasing intensity. "This is ridiculous," she said finally. "The original contract was for $300,000. "The original contract was for building a pool," Marcus replied. "Not for building it, tearing it out, and building it again. Plus the premium for the accelerated timeline you've demanded." Karen's laugh was sharp and brittle. "You can't be serious. This is price gouging, pure and simple." "Actually, it's business." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a series of photos. "This is what your pool looked like yesterday morning. Fully functional, beautifully designed, exactly to the specifications. You approved. This," he gestured at the crater behind them, "is what it looks like now." He began walking her through the invoice, his voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow student. "Demolition and removal of existing work, $43,000. Rush fees for new permits, $12,000. Premium charges for expedited material delivery, $68,000. Overtime labor costs to meet your 6-week deadline, $120,000. Disposal fees for perfectly good materials you've demanded we throw away, $37,000. Karen's face was growing paler with each line item, but Marcus continued relentlessly. "Re-engineering fees because the new design requires different structural support, $55,000. Penalty charges we'll have to pay other clients whose projects we'll have to delay, $94,000. And my personal oversight fee, since you specifically demanded I handle every aspect personally, $100,000. "This is extortion," Karen whispered. "This is cost accounting," Marcus corrected. "Every single charge is documented and justifiable. You demanded perfection with an impossible timeline after destroying perfectly acceptable work. Perfection costs money, Mrs. Blackwood. And impossibility costs even more." Karen's hand shook as she held the invoice. "I never agreed to these rates." "You never asked about these rates," Marcus replied. "You assumed that money could solve any problem without considering the actual cost of the solutions you demanded." For the first time since he'd known her, Karen Blackwood looked genuinely uncertain. The confidence that had carried her through decades of getting her way was cracking like ice in spring. "I need to discuss this with my financial advisor," she said. "Of course." Marcus pulled out a second document. "This is a work stoppage notice. As of right now, all construction on your property ceases until payment arrangements are made. My crew will be removing our equipment today." "You can't do that," Karen said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "Actually, I can. It's in the contract you signed. Section 12, subsection 4. Non-payment or dispute of charges allows for immediate work stoppage." Karen stared at him as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You planned this." "I planned nothing," Marcus said. "You created this situation entirely through your own choices. You demanded we destroy acceptable work. You demanded an impossible timeline. You demanded personal oversight. I simply calculated what those demands actually cost. My daughter's engagement party is 6 weeks away, which gives us plenty of time to complete the work once payment is arranged. Marcus began walking toward his truck. I'll be in my office if you'd like to discuss payment options. Wait, Karen called after him. We can negotiate this. There has to be some middle ground. Marcus turned back to face her, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression, not cruelty, but the weight of years of dealing with people who believed money made them superior to everyone else. Mrs. Blackwood, in 30 years of construction, I've learned something important about negotiations. They work best when both parties have something the other wants. You want a pool in 6 weeks. I want to be paid fairly for my work. The question is, what's your daughter's perfect engagement party worth to you? Karen looked at the invoice again, then at the destruction surrounding her. $800,000 is insane for a swimming pool. You're not paying for a swimming pool. Marcus said quietly. You're paying for the consequences of treating people like they're disposable. You're paying for the arrogance of assuming that everyone else's time and expertise has no value. And you're paying for the lesson that some problems can't be solved by simply throwing money at them. They require respect, planning, and reasonable expectations. He climbed into his truck and started the engine. Through the open window, he could see Karen standing alone among the rubble of her backyard, the invoice clutched in her hands like a death sentence. Mr. Rivera, she called out, her voice smaller than he'd ever heard it. Yes, If I pay this, when could you start? Marcus looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd spent weeks treating him and his crew like servants, who demanded they throw away perfectly good work because of imaginary flaws, who'd threatened his reputation and livelihood as casually as ordering lunch. Payment in full, certified funds, by close of business today, he said. Work resumes tomorrow morning. As he drove away, Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror to see Karen Blackwood standing alone in her ruined paradise, holding an invoice. That would teach her the most expensive lesson of her privileged life. But the real lesson was just beginning. Because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Marcus Rivera wasn't just any contractor, he was the business partner of her ex-husband, David Blackwood. The same David Blackwood who'd been fighting for years to modify their divorce settlement. The same David who'd been documenting Karen's extravagant spending habits for their ongoing custody battle over their 16-year-old son, and the same David Blackwood who would be very interested to learn that his ex-wife had just committed to spending nearly $1 million on a swimming pool while claiming she couldn't afford increased child support payments. Marcus reached for his phone as he pulled through the estate gates. Some invoices were about money. The call came at 2:47 p.m., just as Marcus was reviewing blueprints for the Henderson project. Karen's voice on the other end was strained, barely recognizable from the imperious tone she'd wielded that morning. The money will be transferred by 5 o'clock, she said without preamble. Certified funds, as requested. Marcus set down his pencil and leaned back in his chair. All of it. All of it. There was a pause, filled with what sounded like controlled breathing. Mr. Rivera, I need to ask you something. I'm listening. This invoice, the amount, it's going to become public record, isn't it? Through permits, municipal filings, that sort of thing. Marcus felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. All construction projects over $50,000 are reported to the county. It's required by law. Another pause. Longer this time. I see. Mrs. Blackwood, is there something specific you're concerned about? No, she said quickly. Too quickly. I prefer to keep my private affairs private. Of course, Marcus replied. I'll have my crew back on site first thing tomorrow morning. After ending the call, Marcus sat in his office for a long moment, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across his desk. The invoice he'd presented that morning was legitimate, every charge documented, every fee justified. But it was also strategic, designed to accomplish something far more significant than recovering costs. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in months. David Blackwood. David answered on the first ring. Marcus. This is unexpected. David, we need to talk. Are you free for dinner tonight? That depends. Is this about business or about Karen? Both. There was a pause. Rosario's at 7. I'll be there. Rosario's was the kind of neighborhood Italian restaurant where deals were made over red wine and handshakes still meant something. Marcus arrived first, choosing a corner booth where they could talk without being overheard. David walked in exactly at 7, looking every bit the successful architect he'd become, tailored suit, confident stride, but with tired eyes that spoke of years fighting legal battles. "You look good, Marcus," David said, sliding into the booth. "Business must be treating you well." "Can't complain." Marcus signaled the waitress for 2 glasses of wine. "How's Jake?" David's expression softened. 16 and angry at the world. Especially angry at me for putting him in the middle of all this custody nonsense. Still living with Karen. Most of the time. Though he's been asking to stay with me. More often. David leaned forward. "But you didn't call me here to discuss my son. What's going on?" Marcus pulled out a copy of the invoice and slid it across the table. David's eyes widened as he scanned the numbers. $847,000 for a pool. "Your ex-wife is a very demanding client," Marcus said carefully. "She insisted we tear out perfectly good work and start over, with a 6-week deadline." David read through the itemized charges, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Jesus, Marcus, this is insane, even for Karen." "It gets worse," Marcus said. "She paid it. Full amount, certified funds, transferred this afternoon." David set down the invoice as if it had caught fire. She paid nearly $1 million for a swimming pool, while simultaneously claiming, in court documents, that she can't afford to increase Jake's allowance or contribute more to his college fund, Marcus said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at the invoice, his mind clearly racing through the implications. In their ongoing custody battle, Karen had consistently argued that her lifestyle expenses were fixed and necessary, that she couldn't afford to pay more child support or contribute additional funds to their son's education. "How did you know?" David asked finally. "About the court case, I mean." "I didn't, initially," Marcus admitted. "But when someone spends nearly $1 million on a pool while claiming poverty in family court, let's just say it raises questions." David picked up his wine glass, then set it down without drinking. "You realize what this means?" "I realize what this could mean," Marcus corrected. "What it actually means depends on what you do with the information." "She's been fighting me for 2 years over a $50,000 increase in educational support," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. $50,000. And she just spent 17 times that amount on a pool. Marcus watched his old friend process the magnitude of Karen's hypocrisy. They'd known each other for over 2 decades, had built their first major project together when they were both young and hungry. David had been the architect, Marcus the contractor. They'd made a good team until Karen decided that Marcus wasn't successful enough to be part of their social circle. "There's something else you should know," Marcus said. "The engagement party she's throwing for your daughter? She's budgeted another $200,000 for that. Catering, flowers, entertainment, the works." David's head snapped up. "Emily's getting engaged." "You didn't know." "Karen doesn't exactly keep me informed about family events," David said bitterly. "When is it?" 6 weeks. Which is why she demanded the impossible timeline for the pool. David pulled out his phone and began scrolling through text messages. "Emily hasn't said anything to me about an engagement. About a boyfriend, even. Maybe she's waiting for the right time to tell you. Or maybe Karen told her not to tell me." David's voice carried years of accumulated frustration. "She's turned my own daughter against me, Marcus. Emily barely speaks to me anymore. And Jake sees right through Karen's games, but is stuck in the middle." Marcus watched his friend struggle with emotions that had been building for years. The divorce had been bitter, but the custody battle had been brutal. Karen had used every weapon at her disposal, money, social connections, emotional manipulation, to maintain control over their children. "David," Marcus said carefully, "what if I told you there was a way to change the dynamic? To show the court exactly who Karen really is when she thinks no one is looking?" "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed David a series of photos, Karen screaming at workers, pointing angrily at perfectly acceptable construction, the destroyed pool that had met every specification she'd approved. "I've been documenting everything," Marcus said. "Every unreasonable demand, every tantrum, Every instance of treating my crew like servants. I have video of her demanding we throw away $40,000 worth of perfectly good materials because the tile grout was aesthetically unpleasing. David stared at the images. She hasn't changed. No, she hasn't. But now there's a paper trail. An $800,000 paper trail that directly contradicts everything she's claimed in court about her financial situation. The judge would have to consider this, wouldn't he? Along with the engagement party expenses, the travel costs, the shopping sprees. Marcus leaned forward. David, I've watched you fight this battle for years. You've been playing defense, while she controls the narrative. Maybe it's time to go on offense. David picked up the invoice again, studying the numbers with new understanding. You planned this. I responded to her demands with appropriate pricing, Marcus said carefully. What she chose to do with that pricing was entirely her decision. And, if I use this in court, then you use it. But David. Marcus met his friend's eyes. Make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Do it for Jake. Do it for Emily. Don't do it for revenge. David nodded slowly. Jake deserves better than being caught between his parents' anger. And Emily. God, Emily deserves to have her father at her engagement party. Then make it happen. As they left the restaurant, David turned to Marcus one last time. Why now? Why help me after all these years? Marcus thought about the question as they walked to their cars. Because some people think money makes them untouchable. They think they can treat others however they want without consequences. Today, Karen Blackwood learned that every action has a price. And sometimes, that price is higher than they ever imagined. But as Marcus drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real reckoning was still to come. Karen had paid the invoice, but she didn't yet understand the full cost of her choices. That understanding would come soon enough, because tomorrow, when construction resumed on her perfect pool, Marcus Rivera would be there with his cameras, his documentation, and his unwavering commitment to showing the world exactly who Karen Blackwood really was when she thought no one was watching. The first sign that something had shifted came at 6:23 a.m., when Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mr. Rivera, this is Emily Blackwood. Can we meet? I need to ask you something about my mother. Marcus stared at the message as he sat in his truck outside the Blackwood estate. Emily was 22, fresh out of USC with a degree in environmental science, and according to David, possessed her father's integrity and her mother's determination, a combination. That made her formidable when she set her mind to something. He typed back, of course. When and where? Coffee shop on Melrose. 1 hour. I'll be the one who looks like she hasn't slept. Marcus forwarded the message to David, then headed inside to check on his crew. The pool reconstruction was progressing smoothly. His men worked with the efficiency of professionals who understood that every hour mattered when dealing with clients like Karen Blackwood. Morning, boss, called Tommy Restrepo, his foreman. Mrs. B been out yet? Not yet, Marcus replied. But the day is young. Tommy grinned. $20 says she finds something wrong with the rebar placement. You're on, Marcus said, but his mind was already elsewhere. Emily's text suggested that cracks were forming in Karen's carefully constructed facade, and those cracks were about to become fractures. The coffee shop was crowded with the usual morning rush of aspiring actors and screenwriters, but Emily Blackwood stood out like a beacon of understated elegance. She'd inherited her father's thoughtful eyes and her mother's bone structure, but there was something in her posture that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. Mr. Rivera, she said, standing as he approached. Thank you for meeting me. Emily, you look like your father. People tell me I act like him too. She sat back down, wrapping her hands around a coffee cup that looked untouched, which is probably why my mother and I don't get along very well these days. Marcus studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. Your message sounded urgent. It is. Emily pulled out her phone and showed him a screenshot of a bank transfer. Last night, my mother moved $147,000 out of the family trust, the trust that's supposed to pay for my brother's college education. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Emily, she paid your invoice with money that wasn't legally hers to spend, Emily continued. Money that was specifically designated for Jake's education and my graduate school expenses. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Karen hadn't just spent nearly $1 million on a swimming pool, she'd stolen it from her own children. "How do you know this?" he asked. "Because I'm the secondary trustee," Emily said bitterly. "My grandmother set up the trust before she died, and she insisted that someone from my generation have oversight. She didn't trust my mother's spending habits, and apparently she was right." Emily opened her laptop and showed Marcus a series of bank statements and trust documents. The trust contains $2 million, supposed to cover education expenses for both Jake and me, plus provide a modest income for basic living expenses. Last month alone, my mother withdrew $300,000 for household maintenance. Now this. Does your father know? I called him this morning. He's meeting with his attorney as we speak. Emily closed the laptop and looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Rivera, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay." "Did you know she was stealing from us when you presented that invoice?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I knew your parents were in the middle of a custody dispute. I knew your mother had been claiming financial hardship in court while living extravagantly. But I didn't know about the trust." "But you suspected something." "I suspected that someone who claims they can't afford child support while demanding nearly $1 million in luxury renovations might not be entirely truthful about their financial situation." Emily nodded slowly. "So you set a trap." "I presented her with the actual cost of her demands. What she chose to do with that information, and which money she chose to use, was entirely her decision." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between them. Finally, Emily spoke again. "There's something else you should know. The engagement party she's planning? There is no engagement. I broke up with my boyfriend 3 months ago." Marcus stared at her. "What?" "I told her we weren't together anymore, but she refused to listen. She'd already started planning this elaborate party, already sent save the dates to 200 people. When I insisted we cancel it, she said I was being dramatic and that would work things out by the party date. So she's spending $200,000 on a party for an engagement that doesn't exist. Using money stolen from her own children," Emily confirmed. "Mr. Rivera, my mother is having some kind of breakdown, and she's taking our entire family down with her." Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through photos from the construction site. "Emily, I need to show you something. But I want you to be prepared. These aren't easy to watch." He showed her the videos he'd taken of Karen's tantrums, her treatment of the construction crew, her demands that perfectly good work be destroyed because of imaginary flaws. Emily watched in silence, her expression growing more troubled with each clip. "How long has she been like this?" "According to your father, it's been getting worse since the divorce. But honestly, I think this is who she's always been. She just hid it better when she had less money to throw around." "God," Emily whispered. "Poor Jake. He's been living with this every day." "Your father's been trying to get increased custody. But she's been claiming poverty while living like a queen," Emily finished. "Well, not anymore. This trust fund theft is going to change everything." Emily's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face went pale. "What is it?" "It's from Jake. He says Mom is having a meltdown because the pool contractors are back, and she's convinced they're trying to sabotage the project." Emily stood abruptly. "I need to get over there. Jake shouldn't have to deal with this alone." "Emily, wait." Marcus caught her arm gently. "Your father asked me to document everything that happens on this project. If your mother is having some kind of breakdown, it might be important evidence for the custody case." "You mean you want to film her?" "I mean I want to protect your brother. And if documenting your mother's behavior helps accomplish that, then yes." Emily studied his face for a long moment. "You really care about this, don't you? It's not just about the money. Your father is a good man who's been fighting an unfair battle for years. Your brother deserves to live somewhere safe and stable. And you deserve to have your education funded by money that legally belongs to you." "Okay," Emily said finally. "Document everything. But Mr. Rivera? When this all comes out, and it will come out, remember that she's still my mother. She's sick, and she needs help, not just punishment." As Emily left the coffee shop, Marcus sat alone with the weight of what he'd learned. Karen's theft from the trust fund changed everything. What had started as a lesson in consequences had become something much more serious: evidence of financial abuse, misappropriation of funds, and potentially criminal behavior. His phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus, we have a problem," David said without preamble. "I just spoke with my attorney. The trust fund theft is bad enough, but there's more. Karen has been borrowing against the house, the investment properties, everything. She's leveraged nearly $15 million in assets to fund her lifestyle." Jesus. It gets worse. The engagement party she's planning? She's already put deposits down with vendors totaling nearly $300,000. All paid. 4 with borrowed money. Marcus closed his eyes. "David, I think she's having some kind of breakdown." That's what Emily said. But breakdown or not, she's destroyed our children's financial security. Jake's college fund is gone. Emily's graduate school money is gone. And if she keeps spending at this rate, they'll lose their inheritance too. What do you want me to do? Finish the pool, David said grimly. Document everything. And Marcus? Be careful. When Karen realizes what's happening, when she understands that her house of cards is collapsing, there's no telling what she might do. As Marcus drove back to the Blackwood estate, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd set something in motion that was far bigger than a simple construction project. The invoice he'd presented had been designed to teach Karen a lesson about consequences. Instead, it had revealed the devastating truth about a woman who'd been stealing from her own children while playing the victim in court. The pool was just the beginning. The real foundation that was cracking was Karen Blackwood's entire carefully constructed life, and when it finally collapsed, everyone would see exactly what had been holding it up: lies, theft, and the profound illusion that money could solve any problem, even the ones created by having too much of it. The end came not with Karen's usual theatrical fury, but with the quiet click of handcuffs in her marble foyer at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Marcus had arrived early to oversee the final tile installation around the pool's infinity edge. The project was nearly complete, a stunning aquatic masterpiece that would have graced the cover of Architectural Digest if anyone still cared about Karen Blackwood's aesthetic achievements. He was reviewing the morning's work schedule when the unmarked cars pulled through the estate gates. 3 black sedans, moving with the purposeful efficiency of law enforcement on a mission they'd been planning for weeks. "Boss," Tommy called from across the pool deck, "we got company." Marcus looked up to see Detective Sarah Chen stepping out of the lead vehicle, followed by 2 FBI agents and a forensic accountant he recognized from previous white-collar cases. Behind them came David Blackwood, his face grim but resolute. "Marcus." Detective Chen nodded as she approached. "We'll need your crew to clear the area. This is going to take a while." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main house, Marcus could see Karen in her silk robe, standing frozen in her kitchen as she watched the parade of officials approach her front door. Even from a distance, he could see the exact moment. She understood that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "Is Jake here?" Marcus asked David quietly. "Emily picked him up last night. They're staying at my place until this is over." David's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the pain in his eyes. 24 years of marriage, and it comes down to this. The knock on Karen's door was professional but firm. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see Karen's body language through the windows: the initial denial, the growing panic, the final resignation as Detective Chen displayed the arrest warrant. Karen Elizabeth Blackwood, Chen's voice carried across the morning air as they escorted her outside. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and misappropriation of trust funds. You have the right to remain silent." Karen's eyes found Marcus as they led her toward the waiting car, her gaze burning with a fury that seemed to compress 23 years of accumulated resentment into a single moment of pure hatred. "This is your fault," she screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. "You did this. You planned this from the beginning." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I built you a pool, Mrs. Blackwood. Everything else was your choice." The FBI agent spent the next 6 hours methodically documenting Karen's financial crimes. Marcus learned later that the investigation had uncovered a pattern of theft spanning 3 years: money diverted from the Children's Trust Fund, fraudulent loans against properties she didn't fully own, and elaborate schemes to hide her spending from the family court. The pool invoice had been the final thread that, when pulled, unraveled the entire tapestry of Karen's deception. 3. Months later, the courtroom was packed for Karen's sentencing hearing. She sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit that seemed to drain all the color from her face, her hands folded in her lap as Judge Catherine Reyes reviewed the pre-sentencing report. "Mrs. Blackwood," Judge Reyes said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "in 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a comprehensive pattern of financial abuse directed at one's own children. You stole nearly $2 million from funds specifically designated for their education and welfare, money that was held in trust for their benefit." Marcus sat in the gallery next to David, Emily, and Jake. The boy had grown inches in the past few months, but more importantly, he'd grown in confidence. Living full-time with his father had given him the stability he'd been missing for years. The evidence presented in this case, Judge Reyes continued, shows a defendant who believed that wealth exempted her from both legal and moral obligations. You treated contractors and service workers as servants. You manipulated court proceedings with false financial statements, and you prioritized your own vanity over your children's future. Karen's attorney whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. She looked diminished, somehow, not just by the jail clothes and the absence of her usual makeup, but by the weight of consequences she'd never imagined could touch her. However, the judge said, the court also recognizes that the defendant has shown signs of mental health issues that may have contributed to her behavior. The psychological evaluation indicates narcissistic personality disorder with elements of financial addiction. Emily reached over and squeezed her father's hand. Despite everything Karen had done, she was still Emily's mother, and the young woman had spent sleepless nights wrestling with the complex emotions of loving someone who had caused so much harm. Therefore, Judge Reyes announced, the court sentences you to 4 years in federal prison, with the possibility of supervised release after 18 months contingent upon full restitution and completion of court-mandated therapy. Karen's shoulders sagged as the sentence was pronounced. 4 years. Her daughter's actual wedding, the one that would happen someday with someone she truly loved, would occur while Karen sat in prison as the bailiffs led her away. Karen turned back once to look at her family. Jake met her eyes with the steady gaze of a young man who'd learned to survive his mother's chaos. Emily's face was streaked with tears, but her posture was strong. And David simply nodded, not in triumph, but in the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice finally served. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the edge of the completed pool, watching the late afternoon sunlight dance across the water surface. The infinity edge created the illusion that the pool extended to the horizon, a perfect marriage of engineering and artistry that represented some of his finest work. The estate was quiet now. A court-appointed trustee managed the property while the legal system sorted through Karen's debts and assets. Most of the house would have to be sold to fund restitution, but the trust fund money had been recovered and returned to Jake and Emily. Beautiful work, David said, walking across the pool deck with 2 cups of coffee. One of my better projects, Marcus agreed, accepting the cup. Though I have to admit, it feels strange seeing it empty. The new owners might fill it, David said. The real estate agent thinks it'll sell quickly once all the legal issues are resolved. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 old friends who'd weathered a storm that had nearly destroyed both their businesses and their relationship with Karen's manipulations. Jake got into Stanford, David said eventually. Full scholarship. Full scholarship. Emily's starting her master's program at UC Berkeley in the fall. Both of them can pursue their dreams without worrying about money. And Karen. David's expression grew thoughtful. She's responding well to therapy, according to her doctors. For the first time in years, she's forced to confront the consequences of her actions without being able to buy her way out of them. Marcus nodded. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable ones. Speaking of expensive lessons, David said with a slight smile, I have something for you. He handed Marcus an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000. What's this for? Hazard pay, David said. For dealing with my ex-wife's breakdown while maintaining your professionalism and integrity. Also for having the courage to document everything when you could have just walked away. Marcus looked at the check, then at his old friend. David, I can't accept this. Yes, you can. Because what you did wasn't just about building a pool or even about teaching Karen a lesson. You helped save my children from a mother who was systematically destroying their future. That's worth more than money. As they walked toward their cars, David turned back for one last look at the pool. You know what's ironic? It really is beautiful. If Karen had just accepted the original design, she'd have had something wonderful to enjoy. Instead, she ended up with the most expensive swimming pool in California and no way to use it. Marcus climbed into his truck and rolled down the window. David, for what it's worth, I think she'll be okay eventually. Prison has a way of teaching people lessons that money never could. I hope so, David replied. Not for my sake, but for Jake and Emily's. They deserve to have their mother back someday, the real version of her, not the person she became when she thought money made her untouchable. As Marcus drove away from the Blackwood estate for the final time, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all to this point. An $800,000 invoice had seemed like justice at the time, a way to teach an entitled client about the real cost of perfection. But the true cost had been much higher than any of them had imagined. Karen had paid with her freedom, her family, and her carefully constructed identity. Jake and Emily had paid with their trust in their mother and their faith in the stability of family. David had paid with years of legal battles and the pain of watching his children suffer, and Marcus? Marcus had paid with the knowledge that sometimes, when you set out to teach someone a lesson about consequences, you end up learning just as much about them yourself. The invoice had been settled in full. But the real reckoning, the slow, difficult work of healing broken relationships and rebuilding trust, would continue for years to come. Some debts, Marcus had learned, couldn't be paid with money. They required something